All right, so I've been doing a lot of construction work recently. I've been working on a video essay. I've been too busy to have fun reading and talking about books that I love. And so I thought, you know what? I want to focus on being in time just for a little bit. I'm just going to focus on one page to show you that you don't have to start at the beginning to get a lot out of it, as long as you're reading it with someone who knows what they're talking about. So I have a whole lecture series on being in time that you can have access to as a subscriber at Theory Underground. This is one of my 3 favorite texts of all time, one of the 3 that I like to go back to and wrestle with all the time. And I wrote a chapter of Waypoint dedicated to the idea of wrestling with being in time. It was actually previously published as a journal article in a peer-reviewed journal, where I argue that the form matches the content throughout this work, and that it's not just obtuse and obscurantist jargon, that actually it's important for the points that he's making that he talk in a way that slow us down. If you want to read that, well, check out my book Waypoint. But I'll just show you, right? Rather than make an argument as to why this writing style is defensible or what have you, I just want to show you, you can dive in the deep end. And this is actually something that I want to be doing a lot more with people and have been doing recently at Theory Underground. But let's just focus on page 250. I love this page for some reasons that we'll get into. So here we go. To have faith in the reality of the external world, whether rightly or wrongly, to prove this reality for it, whether adequately or inadequately, to presuppose it, whether explicitly or not, attempts such as these, which have not mastered their own basis with full transparency, presuppose a subject which is proximally worldless or unsure of its world, and which must, at bottom, first assure itself of a world. Thus, from the very beginning, being in the world is disposed to take things in some way, to suppose, to be certain, to have faith, a way of behaving which itself is always a founded mode of being in the world. What is he getting at? Well, he's talking about the way that philosophy puts the world in question and then acts like you have to prove the world, when in reality, what you would have to prove is a worldless subject. There is no such thing as a worldless subject. Or is there? He's going to say that there's a good reason that philosophers are unsure of the world. He's going to say that there's a good reason, and that is that being in the world, this compound idea that he just spent the last several chapters developing, is one that can get shattered. And when it gets shattered, what you're left with is a subject, a pure subject in relation to a world of objects, okay? So I'll get into that a little bit more, but right now I just want to focus on this idea of having faith in the reality of the external world. At the point that you're saying that a person has faith in the reality of the world outside of themselves, they've presupposed this distinction between inside and outside. Now they think that they have to prove reality, or that they have to presuppose reality. He's arguing with Descartes. He's also arguing with his mentor that he dedicated this book to, Edmund Husserl. Now, I'm a kind of Cartesian myself. Okay, cards on the table. I love this kind of hyper-critical, skeptical approach. But at the same time, there's nothing more critical or skeptical than to take on that kind of critical skepticism itself. And Heidegger is really good at doing an immanent critique of that sort of Cartesian, Husserlian mode. And for those who are less familiar with all of this, Descartes in his Meditations practices hyperbolic doubt, where he puts everything into question. And that is, I think, the natural inclination of a certain kind of critical thinker, right? The problem of reality, in the sense of the question whether an external world is present at hand and whether such a world can be proved, turns out to be an impossible one, not because its consequences lead to inextricable impasses, but because the very entity which serves as its theme is one which, as it were, repudiates any such formulation of the question, right? So you are to even question it in the first place, you have to assume a lot of stuff. And one of the things that we're doing when we talk about the problem of reality and whether we can prove that reality is real or what have you, is that it holds up reality to the standard of the present at hand, this compound term, present at hand, right? Well, present at hand means like making present, the perception of something present, perceiving something in its parts, which is different than using or being with, right? Being with things in the world is very different from trying to look at them objectively, right? And there's something about the modern scientific mode that wants to instrumentalize everything and break it down into its parts and understand how it works as a mechanism, which can be very useful. But also, if that's your primary mode of seeing things, what gets lost is how they actually are, in a sort of sense. How things actually are in the world, how things actually are in our world, how we actually relate to them, which would be ready to hand. So a ready to hand relation with this marker is one where I just grab it and I use it. Whereas a present at hand mode is where I'm describing it. Okay, it's blue, it's got these words on it, the tip pops off, I've got the marker, I can, it's got ink, I can use it. But we could get even more granular. We could talk about the biochemical makeup of this pen, right? Like what are the actual base elements that go into it? But understanding what goes into it is different from understanding how to use it. That scientific modern approach has become the standard against which we judge everything, when in reality, that's just how we can figure out how things work. That's not the same thing as figuring out how to use them at bare minimum. Heidegger is going to later get way beyond just use value, though, and focus on other things as well. But at the most important level, if you're a human being living in the world, how you use things is the main way that you will relate to them, not understanding them in their constituent parts, right? And so that being raised as the measure of knowledge is something that is very interesting, and it's a problem. Our task is not to prove that an external world is present at hand or to show how it is present at hand, but to point out why Dasein, as being in the world, has a tendency to bury the external world in nullity epistemologically before going on to prove it. The reason for this lies in Dasein's falling and in the way in which the primary understanding of being has been diverted to being as presence at hand. A diversion which is motivated by the falling itself. If one formulates the question critically with such an ontological orientation, then what one finds present at hand is proximally and solely certain, is something merely inner. After the primordial phenomenon of being in the world has been shattered, the isolated subject is all that remains, and this becomes the basis on which it gets joined together with a world. World in quotation marks here. Epistemologically in quotation marks here. External world in quotation marks here. Inner and critically. Also in quotation marks. What he's getting at is that this problem of reality, this so-called problem of reality, is the result of being in the world being shattered in the first place. The world has broken down. You've been decontextualized from it. And now that that's the case, you start to epistemologically bury the primary data of the world and the actual experience of the world under a nullity. You negate everything, and then you're like, oh, now I have to prove it. And he's saying all of this is a founded mode of being in the world, as he said at the end of the previous paragraph, right? He says, Thus, from the very beginning, being the world is supposed to take things in some way, to suppose, to be certain, to have faith, a way of behaving which itself is always a founded mode of being in the world. Which is to say, we have our Verstehen, our understanding, our modal understanding, our way of relating to the horizon of possibilities. And then we have our Befindlichkeit, which is to say our attunement, which gets translated in this text as state of mind. We have our fundamental always already being attuned to things. There's a certain way that we're attuned. And then we are in the symbolic order. We are in discourse. And those three things, which is to say modal understanding, are always already being attuned, and our immersion in language, those three things all relate to one another and are equally original before the formation of our subjectivity. Not only are they equally original, but they are the preconditions or the conditions of possibility for our interpreting anything at all, for our conceptualizing anything at all, right? So we are always in this hermeneutic circle, right? Before we are able to interpret, perceive, argue, get into ideology or what have you. Well, this certain mode that is questioning and needing to prove that philosophers get caught up in, that is a founded mode of being in the world, which means it's derivative from a certain modal understanding. It's derivative from a certain kind of attunement, and it's also derivative from a certain niche corner of discourse itself, right? But what is he saying about how the reason for how we bury everything under this epistemological nullity, it has to do with Dasein's falling, right? What does this have to do with falling? And people will sit here and say, oh, well, this is like, he's borrowing from Christian language. He's talking about, the fall of man. And I don't think that that's really useful. He is talking about the fact that we get caught up in non-committal and ambiguous, non-committal curiosity, ambiguity, and idle chatter. And that those three things, what I call the vicious cycle, those three things become a sort of mode of life. Right? You get caught up in this average everyday way of living where you're just not really committing to things. You're talking about things in a sort of way that's always caught up in the present and passing the word along and kind of just chasing the trends, whatever's trending, and talking about things ambiguously enough that you don't really have to understand them. You don't really have to get to the bottom of things, right? That's what he calls falling. And what it's a fall from is our basis in understanding things in a much deeper way. It's a fall from our basis, our condition of possibility of being attuned, right? So non-committal curiosity is a derivative kind of attunement, and we have much higher possibilities of attunement than that, right? And idle chatter is a derivative fall from a richer, more committed, less ambiguous kind of discourse. Okay. But this falling, this cycling through of ambiguity, non-committal curiosity, and idle chatter really gets off on talking about things in a way that makes them present at hand. It decontextualizes them. It doesn't come from any hands-on experience. You're just talking about things in a way. So, whatever it is that you see on TikTok today, like that's a way of making things present, but you're not there. That's not your world. You're not a part of that. You're just voyeuristically, parasocially gawking. And so that's what he's talking about. In this investigation, we cannot discuss at length the many attempts to solve the problem of reality. which has been developed in various kinds of realism and idealism, and in positions which mediate between them. Certainly, a grain of genuine inquiry is to be found in each of these. But certain as this is, it would be just as perverse if one should want to achieve a tenable solution of the problem by reckoning up how much has been correct in each case. What is needed rather is the basic insight that while the different epistemological directions which have been pursued have not gone so very far off epistemologically, their neglect of any existential analytic of Dasein has kept them from obtaining any basis for a well-secured phenomenal problematic. Nor is such a basis to be obtained by subsequently making phenomenological corrections on the concepts of subject and consciousness. Such a procedure would give no guarantee that the inappropriate formulation of the question would not continue to stand. So he's basically saying, if you've gotten off on the wrong foot already, you've already presupposed a worldless subject, and now you use presence at hand ontology as the sole criterion against which you judge the reality of things, or this becomes your sole criterion of truth value. Well, you're so far gone, you're not going to be able to correct things working within that framework. No, you're just going to waste your life dealing with pseudo problems. And indeed, he thinks that is what a lot of philosophy becomes, primarily in academia. Which is one of the reasons that Being in Time is such a great work to dive into. It is a critique of academic philosophy. It is a critique of the intellectual and theoretical mind that loses touch with the lived, physical, embodied experience of the world, the engagement with the world. And what I really like here is that he talks about being in the world, this compound thing, getting shattered, and the isolated subject being what remains, and kind of focusing on how the problem of reality, the kinds of pseudo-epistemological questions philosophers will pose as the most important questions, are themselves the result of this shattering of worldhood itself. Now, I think shattering of worldhood is a great way to put it, but I also want to say that this is what I'm getting at in part when I talk about the gerrymandering of the Thinlichkeit, which is to say, we as humans, or as Dasein, we have these different capacities for different attunements. We can be attuned to the world in many different ways. And what happens in the post-class fractured mass, especially through the schooling system, is that we make one or two ways of being attuned our go-to, and it becomes our identity, and that becomes a defensive and competitive identity juxtaposed to all others. Whereas like a more whole human way of being in the world that is intergenerational doesn't take this sort of stand on identity, because it's not this sort of shattered subject, right? And here we are in the niches of the post-class fractured mass, trying to figure out how to live the good life. And I think Being in Time can help us really assess the situation. And at the same time, learning to follow out someone who uses a non-standard way of writing and thinking that grounds it out in relatable contemporary experiences is a great way to radically accelerate our reading, listening, comprehension abilities, right? And so as far as bang for your buck goes with reading difficult texts and increasing your comprehension levels, I think Being in Time might be it might be the actual best. I'll just put it that way. It might be the actual best place to go. Bang for your buck, time energy wise. This is where you should go. This is what you should be reading this summer. I have a lecture course. You can do it at your own pace. Just become a subscriber at TU. And if you are a platinum level subscriber, then we can do a monthly 3-hour exegetical session where we take whichever passage you've been struggling with the most. We'll read through it. We'll talk about it. Or if you just want to dive in on anything and you haven't done any of the reading yet, that's totally fine. We'll just sit there for 1 whole hour on Zoom and we'll both just read in silence. And then after an hour of reading together, you can show me the parts that you were most confused about. And then I will do an exegetical. And in the more traditional sense, an exegesis means someone who's been over the text many times, sort of giving a lecture on it, but at the same time reading passages from it. So it could look like I actually read for a whole hour and I make commentary on it while going, but it could also mean that we pick out passages and really focus on them, kind of like we just did right here. So if you'd like to do this with me, and become a subscriber today. Last thing I'll say is, Being in Time is one of my 3 favorite texts of all time. Totality and Infinity is the necessary ethical expansion pack on Being in Time. It's also a great sort of critique of Das Kapital, my other favorite text. So Being in Time and Totality and Infinity and Das Kapital, those 3 go hand in hand for me. Being in Time and Das Kapital are both attempts to understand the most important aspects of the whole world and what makes it go round from a sort of humanities perspective, right? At the level of meaning, right? Not at the level of pure function, but at the level of meaning. Well, Totality and Infinity is a great critique of both of these, as well as Hegel, but especially of Heidegger and Marx. But more importantly, a critique of postmodernism, a critique of contemporary anthropology, a critique of social justice advocacy, a critique. It's a profound defense of the ethical, but not in the way that Judith Butler will appropriate him to her purposes. Not in the way that Simon Critchley will appropriate him to his purposes. Though I think both can offer valuable insight into Emmanuel Levinas's work. Well, with that said, Emmanuel Levinas, I taught the first half of Totality and Infinity last year, and I'll be teaching the second half coming this October. If you want to be a part of that course, become a subscriber at Theory Underground. All right. Take care.